Hi, Frank. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, it's going good. How's it going with you?
It's going great. About 4 hours behind you, though, so I've got
Yeah.
some catching up to do.
Okay. You have written quite a few novels. I was on your website earlier today and was quite impressive. Before we get to the latest books that you want to talk about, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. and went into the Army out of high school. I was in military intelligence. Learned how to speak Czech and spy on the Czech Army back when they were the enemy. That changed while I was in. Wall came down, Velvet Revolution, all of that happened all while I was stationed in Germany. So it was a pretty cool experience. After the Army, I became a police officer. I served for 20 years with the Spokane Police Department, retiring in 2013. I was fortunate in my career that I got to do the job for a period of time for about the first half of my career of police officer, training officer, detective, corporal, where the rubber meets the road sort of jobs. And then in the second half of my career, I fell kind of backwards into a leadership role and then ended up spending the last 10 years of my career as a leader. I retired as a captain. And that was really cool because I got to be associated with or command units that I never would have been a part of as a rank and file member. So I got to be the SWAT team commander. I got to be the K9 unit commander. I got to head up volunteer services and eventually the entire patrol division. And these experiences were great on a professional level, but also eventually, as a writer, I got a lot more firsthand experience that informs my crime fiction. Speaking of which, I've been writing since I was very young. My first book was published in 2006, and most of it is crime fiction. Since I retired, I did a little bit of a teaching gig for about 4 years, teaching leadership all over the US and Canada. But I hung up my PowerPoint clicker back in the end of 2017. I've been doing this full time since then. And as you mentioned, I've had a pretty good number of books come out, most of them in the crime fiction genres.
Hmm. And so 2006 was your first publication. That's quite a while ago. And how many novels would you say you have?
Every so often I stop and count them just to give an accurate answer of that question. And right now, over 40 is the best answer. I haven't
Okay.
counted in a bit. The little bit of the confusion for me comes up because I have books at different stages of development at any given time. And so, in my mind, it's number X, and in reality, the published numbers, X minus three or something like that. So it's easier to be general these days.
Yeah. Well, let's get right to it. You're working on something this year. It's your latest work. Tell us all about that.
I'm editing right now the 14th River City novel. Now, River City is, I would say, my flagship series. That first book that I mentioned in 2006, that was the first River City novel, Under a Raging Moon. And these are police procedurals that feature an ensemble cast of officers and detectives, occasionally people in leadership roles, as they deal with some kind of a crisis in every book. But it also follows their professional and personal lives to a degree as well. Um, the the focus has bounced around a little bit from different characters, but the core character pretty quickly emerged as Officer Katie McLeod, and she's been the center of the majority of the books, not all of them, but the majority of them. About 80% of the series are novels. There's about three or four short story collections that are all River City short stories that allow me to dive into some more secondary and tertiary characters and little storylines. But the majority are novels. And in this one, Katie McLeod is a major crimes detective who is trying to solve two separate cases at once. One is a burglar who is cutting window screens and going into the homes of older folks at night. and stealing their money and medication and then terrorizing them basically. And at the same time, she gets handed a cold case, a missing woman from about 5 years prior. And as she starts delving into that, she comes across some secrets that she maybe didn't want to know and has to follow up on those. So both of these cases are happening at the same time.
That takes care of the first of 4 projects you're doing this year.
Yeah, I've got 4 novels coming out this year. That one comes out in October, River City number 14, All the Forgotten Yesterdays. I'm pretty excited about it because a couple of interesting things happened. One that I'll share was I had a review on the very first book that was what I would call a negative review, but not a bad review. And in this negative review, this person had good things to say about the craft part of the book, the writing and the storytelling, but he took issue with some of the things that happened. One of which was kind of the big event at the end, in which one of the heroes of the story deals with the main bad guy. And I won't spoil it for readers, but he took a very different view of what happened there. He all but called it corrupt, really. And I had never thought of it in that fashion. It was more of a good old fashioned, this action ending. And he got me thinking about it. And I realized that through a certain lens, that is how it could be viewed. And I wanted that to come into the River City universe at some point. And I realized that this was the book where that would happen. And so Katie McLeod, who looks up to this other person, this officer who was her mentor and her friend, is forced to hear this other viewpoint of actions that he took, and she struggles with it. And so it's been an interesting journey on this book because she hasn't had to face anything precisely like that before. So hey, a negative review worked its way into a positive creative outlet, I guess.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I was thinking, law is good. Law enforcement is good. Sometimes it makes mistakes. And with all the crime novels that you have written, have you worked in some of those mistakes, or was this the time where you realized that perhaps this could be that?
Yeah, I would let the reader decide if it was a mistake, if it was vengeance, if it was murder. I mean, you could look at it in a variety of ways, depending on your worldview and your take on the context. But I hadn't ever thought of it in that way, which is a little interesting in that I've had officers make mistakes before. I mean, the second book, one of the other main characters makes a guy named Stefan Kopriva, young patrol officer, makes a horrific mistake. And it is a mistake. It's not, there's no malice behind it. But it's very costly, and and spoiler alert, but it ends up driving him from the department. He leaves. And that's one of the other books that I'm working on this year is a book in that spin-off series that follows him after he's gone from the police department. And so yeah, I have worked in mistakes aplenty, but true to life, the majority of those mistakes have been ones of either ignorance or misstep, or just an outright error, just occasionally incompetence on someone's part, but not malevolence, not a malicious. They're mistakes of the not mistakes that were intended to happen, but they still have consequences. I mean,
Yeah.
law enforcement is a high risk sort of profession, and there's often a lot riding on the decisions that the law enforcement officers make. And so they're rightfully held very accountable for those decisions, and should be. So it's a little bit more of a it's a high consequence game, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
Well, in all your years that you spent in the military and the police department, many things changed during that time. And during the time that you're writing these series of these crime novels, Do you find yourself wanting to keep up with some of the more recent social ideas about what is right and wrong?
Absolutely. The River City series, the first book starts in 1994, and so that's a series that I'm trying to catch up to the current day. I've only made it to 2010, so but I'm making my pace is picking up, so I will eventually catch up here sometime. I would expect, but by 2030 I'll be in the mid 2020s, I think. So that's happening. But some of the more recent developments over the last decade, um, I've highlighted those in other series. I wrote a series with my friend Colin Conway called the Charlie 316 series, which actually originated from an idea that he had that he brought to me and said, let's collaborate on this. He wanted to tell this story, but he wanted to draw on some of my experiences to make sure that the story was at least rooted in authenticity, even if we were blowing things up to fictional proportions. And so we wrote a 4-book arc in that series. Each book stands on its own, but they're best read in order, and the things that occur in that first book are kind of wrapped up at the end of that fourth book. And we've been doing our intention is to continue to write in that series, but each book will be a standalone in that universe. And the first one to do that was a book called The Ride Along, in which I took a patrol officer who is a dedicated cop, 14 years on the job, father and grandfather served on the department, good person. And he has a ride along that comes out, who is a teacher. She's part of a locally based reform advocacy program for police reform. And she's a good person. She's a smart person, and they both came by their belief system very honestly and not at all with hate in their heart. But they're very different belief systems. They have very different views on things that surround the concept of modern policing. And so imagine you put those two folks into the front seat of a patrol car for a 10-hour shift on graveyard. Uh, Sparks are going to fly, and they do, not of the romantic kind, but of the debate kind. And as they're going from call to call, they're having some rather heated discussions, but they're also beginning to listen to each other just a little bit. Now, it's not a Pollyanna story where one person, is a straw person for the other's viewpoints. They're both very fairly and honestly represented, and there's an exchange of ideas, and this was born of my own frustration for people not really having an understanding of the opposing viewpoint and nobody talking about it. Everybody just yelled at each other or chanted slogans or waited for the other person to finish talking so they could get their counterpoint in and destroy their argument or whatever. And so that frustration kind of poured into me creating a scenario where these two people had to listen to each other because they're alone in a car for 10 hours.
Yeah. Must have been very interesting to write that. It sounds like the aspect of them being police officers is just sort of secondary. It's more about the message you want to drive through your novel in this case.
Yeah, it was, but I definitely wanted one of the views to come from a working police officer, because those individuals have experiences and understanding of the reality of that, that most folks outside of that reality don't entirely comprehend. Of course, we never did a wonderful job and still don't of explaining those things. That would go a long way, I think, towards helping. But likewise, I wanted somebody who was honestly and intelligently critical of the profession, and could describe the reasoning behind that, not just chant a slogan, or take an extreme view that isn't anymore, that's just not helpful. It doesn't help anything. I mean, you're not going to abolish law enforcement in Western society. You can reform it, and we should, but you're not, you can't. That kind of a radical view, I didn't think was going to be very helpful.
For
And
sure.
so
Yeah.
they had a long and winding conversation, and in the midst of interacting with a lot of police situations.
What other types of crimes do your crime novels take shape in, like murder and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I a lot of my books are set in either a real or fictional version of Spokane, which makes some sense, right? Since that's the city that I knew, and it's big enough to realistically house those kinds of stories without becoming a Cabot Cove sort of syndrome. Um, but the reality is that murder isn't something that happens every day in a town like that, in a city like that. And so I felt like while I wanted that to come up, I needed to explore other crimes that occur. And so robbery comes up, sexual assault comes up, gang warfare comes up, and then uh, there are different takes on each of these different types of crimes as well. I like to kind of try to you know keep it fresh to a degree. I mean, you don't want to read the same old thing every
Yeah,
time you pick
yeah,
up the book. You want the characters to be familiar,
yeah.
but the scenario to be fresh.
Is there some humor sometimes? It can get like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of banter between partners and other cops, and cops are like a lot of those kinds of professions. There's some gallows humor. There's some pretty good ribbing that goes back and forth amongst compatriots.
Even with the
And so
criminals, I suppose. I mean, the people,
at times,
you're arresting could be funny in a weird way.
yeah, I mean, sometimes it's funny in a contentious sort of way,
Yeah.
and occasionally it can be humorous in a more of a collaborative way. I
Hmm.
mean, the reality is as police officers, if you deal with the same people over and over and over again, there are going to be some instances where you could almost say, if I did something different and he did something different, like if we were both plumbers, we'd probably be having a beer together once in a while. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
that can develop. I mean,
Yeah.
there's an old cartoon, an old like Looney Tunes cartoon with a sheepdog and a coyote who like clock in before then the coyote tries to steal all the sheep, and the sheepdog's constantly stopping him, and it's and then mid punch the whistle goes and they go clock out and go get a beer together or whatever, I suppose.
Yeah, one of my
That
favorites.
was It wasn't common, that kind of dynamic, but it wasn't unheard of either.
Yeah,
Not the going and getting a beer part, but that banter.
that's right. Who would you say is your demographic for buying your books?
Well, on the procedural front, anybody who likes to read books in the vein of Ed McBain, or like shows like you know Blue Bloods or NYPD Blue or Southland. Going back a little further, maybe Hill Street Blues is another example, I suppose.
Mhm.
Um, that would be the demographic for, I think, for the River City series.
Overall, how's sales been for you?
Boy, I'll tell you, that is a like the stock market from month to month and year to year. There's been times where I've been thrilled and humbled by how well things have sold, and there's been other times where I felt like I was riding in the middle of the desert and hoping a buzzard came by to read a few words. It's just very unpredictable, and it can be a changing marketplace, especially over the last decade. But the fact of the matter is, I'm happy with where it's at, and there's nothing more satisfying than hearing back from a reader who enjoyed a book that you wrote and took the time to drop a note to say so.
Hmm. Now, have we covered everything that you're doing this year, or is there a couple of more projects?
No, I've got a couple others going on. I mentioned the spinoff series from River City, the Stefan Kopriva mysteries. And this is a private investigator series, so it's told in the first person from the viewpoint of Kopriva. It picks up about 10 years after he leaves the job. And early on in the series, it's very much a redemption arc. I mean, it sort of still is, but he does manage to get a little bit of that, or find a little bit of peace to a degree. And I just released the fourth book in that series in February. It's called Hope Dies Last. And ironically, he is a little bit peaceful. And then his mother, who left him when he was very young, shows up, and peace goes right out the window for a while. And there's a huge uproar and a betrayal and a murder and an investigation that he maybe doesn't even want to know the answers to, but it still has to delve into. And so that would I think appeal more to people who like anything from, the Sue Grafton alphabet series to the Matt Scudder series that Lawrence Block writes. If you like first person detective stories, and he's not a licensed investigator, so it's quasi amateur, I guess. Those would be the books that I think would appeal to a person like that.
Interesting.
Oh, my writing partner just came in.
Oh, you got one of those too. Boy, you're just full of stories, and you're very creative, very imaginative. You're enjoying this, aren't you?
I very much am. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a writer since I always felt like I was a writer, much like I imagine you were always a musician. It was just a part of you. And if you had told me when I was in high school that, at some point in my life, I'd be getting up in the morning and bringing my coffee cup to my home office and being a full-time writer with, dozens of books out, I would have been over the moon. And it's a dream come true. And so that is very literally where I'm at right now. And I'm enjoying it.
Any final words on where we could find your books and learn more about you?
My website, frankzafiro.com, is probably the best place to start. I've got a nice little sidebar there that says, what kind of books do you like? And then, has the genres there and suggestions of where to go. If you like the procedurals or the detective books, or hard boiled or thrillers, there's a couple series for each of those. People can click on them and it'll take them to those books. But I am on the more prominent social media platforms and BookBub, and you can follow me or friend me on any of those. And my email address is available there on the website too. And I will say that if you do read a book and you feel like commenting or whatever, I don't receive so many emails that I can't answer all of them. In fact, I quite enjoy saying thank you or hearing from someone. So I'm always up for that as well.
Great. Frank, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. It's been very interesting, and I'll have to maybe check out some of your books myself.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Bye-bye. And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really like to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.